Good evening, good evening, good evening, good evening, good evening, WeatherBrains fans. WeatherBrains episode number 880 is on the air. This is for Monday, the 28th of November, 2022. This is the pre-show. It is an amazing time where we do three things. We share boring personal stories, humorous anecdotes, and from time to time, we say very, very, very outrageous things. Hopefully you had a good Thanksgiving weekend. A lot of folks had a long weekend. Some of us worked on through it. The weather never stops. You know that. Weather never stops. And like I talked about last week, I've worked every Thanksgiving since 1973, which is fine. And I will never, ever gripe about that. It's not a complaint. It's just part of the deal here.
What are you
Bill's
choosing?
got a
What are you choosing not to gripe about?
I've worked every Thanksgiving since 1973.
Yeah.
So
Well, that's all right.
why would you gripe about that? I mean, you're living the dream here.
I would kill to have the chance to work on Thanksgiving at the TV station.
Yeah, I mean,
I once did get to do that a long time ago. It really was fun.
I will never gripe about that. And typically, not always, but typically I'll get off Christmas. The one last year was a total debacle. And
what's going to happen this year?
We had a tornado event and then a snow event, all within the scheduled week off that never was a week off. But again,
it's kind of looking warm on those extended weeklies that week. So that could be a possibility. That's week. Could be a possibility.
I don't know. Those extended weeklies had it warm here when it was, we had 5 consecutive mornings, sub-freezing lows. So those things are about as reliable.
Are you saying you don't trust
toe? No. And, for the people that do that stuff, that's great. I learn a lot by listening to them, and they're interesting to me, but I just don't see a tremendous skill set in some of the stuff we're trying to do here. Hopefully the next generation will be better at seasonal outlooks and all that kind of stuff. So what have I not done here? I just got the embed code. I did the invitations in advance. I know we're missing Jen and we're missing Rick tonight. Apparently it's 50-cent beer night at Hooters, and they have decided to partake.
They get a lot of business off of us.
They do. I mean, we spend a lot of money down there, and we're probably going to have a little thunderstorm situation. It's so strange how everything has changed prior to a severe weather event. Half the job now, it's putting down the hype that people are getting. I mean, I don't know where it's coming from. I guess it's some of the TikTokers and the YouTubers and the whoever, but gosh, it's just, it's out of hand. I mean, it's somebody said they heard that tomorrow night's going to be the worst severe weather night we've had here in 25 years, which means it would be more meaningful than April 27th. Gosh, God, where are you hearing this stuff? We have a warning addiction, hyperbole addiction product, and I'm hope it's not professionals that are doing this, but I don't have time for this. And then you get the crowd, I've lived here all my life. I've lived here for 60 years, and we've never had tornadoes in December before. I said, please, what are you talking about? I mean,
I just wrote about Frisco City, Alabama in 1967. Happened on the day of the Iron Bowl. It was, the Mud Bowl, James, out at Legion Field. Kenny Stabler running for the touchdown at 7-3 Alabama.
Yeah.
And they had an F2 tornado down the main street of Frisco City that afternoon.
But I've lived here 60 years and we've never had a tornado in December, November before. Something has changed here.
Out in Colorado, it's a different story. They're having biblical weather every 2 weeks.
We're just going to be cold and snowy.
It's never snowed in Colorado before. I've been here 60 years, and it's never snowed here in November or December. It's something about old people, and I'm an old people. I'm one of them, and I just don't understand their warped memory of weather. It's very odd.
It used to be the other way. They said, back in when I was 10, it snowed up to my hips, and I had to walk to school.
The best ones are these guys that every year in September they'll say, yeah, when I was growing up on Labor Day, it turned cold and it stayed cold until Easter. So what
That
do you
was the
mean?
year without a winter.
What are you talking about? It's like they have some type of psychiatric disorder or something. It's just strange. Gosh. So I just plod along and do the best I can. But I'm afraid the hypesters have certainly got the megaphone, and they seem to be winning the battle here. And we had a little severe weather threat a few weeks ago, and nothing really happened. And they were shutting down things and shutting down businesses and canceling all this and that. And nothing happened. And man, they were mad at me. See, don't get mad at me. I'm the guy trying to put the hype down here. I mean, yes, but anyway, I wish that as a weather enterprise, we could be better at getting on the same page, because there is conflict between SPC and some local offices and television meteorologists and just some private sector people. And if you want to fight and fuss about it, that's fine. But for the public, we have to have a unified front when the weather's, can be active. And I just don't think we have that right now. It's just like we need to get together and talk and coordinate and come out with a unified message, but that's probably never going to happen. I'm dreaming. I'm a dreamer. We've still got
quiet all of a sudden.
Well, yeah, nobody wants to. I'm the only guy that'll talk about it. I mean, it's just like, my age, I don't care, but I mean, it's like you've got, again, Birmingham puts out a set of, graphics with convective outlook that's different from the SPC. And I've got wonderful, marvelous friends in Birmingham and wonderful, marvelous friends at SPC. But what am I supposed to show on the air here? And then we've got jurisdiction issues with these bizarre CWA boundaries, and I can't show the Birmingham graphics because of Cullman County not being included. And if I show one of those graphics, you don't care about us. We're no man's land. We're left out here. And I have to deal with that. So, but I sound
local congressman.
I don't know why I'm cranky. Leading up to a thunderstorm day that might produce severe weather, it's just, if people could walk a mile in my shoes, if they could walk maybe a half mile, maybe 100 yards in my shoes, that they would know the stuff that you deal with. It has just gotten, it used to be you try and rest up before big severe weather days, so you're ready, you're charged up, you've had rest, you're ready to go. Now you are so drop dead mentally and physically exhausted by the time a high impact weather event begins. You're just burned out, and half of it's dealing with this stuff. And welcome to our television viewers. You've caught me being cranky on a Monday night. But this is where this is the pre-show. This is where we share boring personal stories, which is what this has been. Humorous anecdotes, and we say outrageous things. And part of this has been outrageous. Is everybody here, Bill? Are we all here?
We're all here. Hello, Bruno. Can you hear us okay?
Can you hear just fine?
That sounds good, Paul. We glad to have you with us tonight.
All right, let's get the reporters going and get going here. I need to get off my soapbox.
What's your doggy's name?
That is Sophie.
Sophie.
All right, here we go. We are doing the weather band, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, all right, here we go. In 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Join the American Meteorological Society by becoming a member of the band. The AMS Weather Band is a global community of weather enthusiasts dedicated to learning and sharing their love of science. Visit amsweatherband.org to learn more and join the band today.
You're listening to WeatherBrains. They're kind of a big deal.
You heard the man himself, Bill Curtis, said we're kind of a big deal. This is WeatherBrains, the weekly show all about weather, episode number 880. This is for the 28th of November, 22. We'll be celebrating our 17th anniversary as a podcast in January. We might not be the best. I know we're not the best, but hey, we're the oldest running weather podcast in the universe. We can say that safely. I think Bill Murray, you were in the beginning, weren't you? Weren't you in this thing 17
I
years ago?
was. I was there when I was in a car in Maryland the night you dreamed it up.
And we had a professional host back then. I mean, we actually had a real broadcaster that's David Black, who would produce the thing, and it was a 30-minute show, and it sounded really professional. And we've somehow gone down the tubes over the last several years. But I would say the talent level is top notch. Like, we got James Adelot on the show. When James decided to join this panel, we were elevated greatly. James, how you doing in Tulsa town?
Doing pretty good. Last week of the semester, so cranking out a paper. Took a couple of days off in order to get that done. It is not proceeding nearly as fast as it should.
Well, tell us about this show with Kevin Selly. I'm excited about this. You have not shared it with the world. Share it, plug it, go.
Yeah, I think Kevin and Kim kind of were the brains behind this, and it's basically what researchers want operational meteorologists to know, mainly meteorologists. And we had Sean Ernst on talking about simultaneous tornado and flash flood emergencies. We had Jeanette Sutton, which is the show that Kevin just dropped this morning, talking about warning messaging and call to action statements. She's doing some really cool research up at SUNY Albany on that. So, and we recorded one with the president of AR&D, who had a lot of great things to say, and it was very enlightening.
Yeah, I'm excited about it. Kevin texted me this morning. He said, "You don't need to subscribe to Weather Insights. You wrote the book on all this stuff." No, I don't know anything about this stuff. I mean, as you get older, you learn how much you don't know about communication, messaging, and all the things that you talk about on this show. So I'm excited, and it's called WEX Insights, right, on YouTube.
Yep.
Yeah. So find it and subscribe if you're interested in communicating weather. If you're in television or radio or media or digital, whatever, I think it's going to be good stuff. Troy Kimmel, he could write the book on being a weather communicator. This man is good.
Well, I appreciate that, but I hope I'm good. I hope we, it's every event and how they unfold, and I'm interested in seeing how. I'm sure everything as usual will go fine with James Spann about 24 hours from now, maybe a little bit later than that. Had a call tonight from the emergency manager up in Alcorn County, Mississippi, and Ricky and I talked for a while, kind of talking through the SPC outlook for tomorrow and what the short range stuff was doing. But, we all hope that we can communicate, and I don't think you do it through fear. I don't think you shout at people. I think you just communicate the ideas. And I think that's what James Spann, you do so well. And I'm sure James Tulsa and everyone else, same way. That's what you've got to do. You've got to get people to critically think and give them information so they can make a decision about what kind of action they're going to take, because there's not going to be an emergency manager or a James Spann or Harry James from Tulsa walking to your door and grabbing your hand and telling you what to do. You have to make that decision on your own. So I think that we all do that. Weather Service, I think, does that very well. And Paul, good to see you. I have never met Bruno before, but Bruno, I'll have to talk offline because I know quite a bit about Bruno now, because it came up as a matter of discussion that I have with people in the AMS working on the CBM exam, getting it to Spanish language. And my understanding is that Bruno has been has done a lot of work with that. And Bruno, you're one phone call away from me at one point. We're trying to get that together for the broadcasters. So good to have both of you on the show tonight. And things are quiet here. A little drizzle in the morning, maybe. And then the cold front comes through here and it heads toward Alabama.
Yeah, buddy. We'll formally introduce our guest here in just a minute. And yeah, we are looking at a potential severe weather situation here across the southern states tomorrow and tomorrow night. Again, we're doing the show on Monday, the 28th, and the severe weather potential is for the 29th into the early morning hours of the 30th. So, Dr. Neil Jacobs, you got, let's say you got 1 minute and you want to glance at the severe weather parameters for this thing, are you going to go to the HER or the 3 kilometer NAM or something else? What do you do?
Honestly, what I do is I go to Buff Kit Warehouse and
Ah.
and look at the output there. That sort of pulls in a couple different models, gives you the parameters. You can also go to another site I like to go to is Tropical Tidbits and go to the mesoscale models and then point and click and bring up the forecast SKUTs.
Yeah, I think Pivotal Weather does that. You point and it brings up a forecast sounding, which is pretty cool. But the Buff Kits, that's a web-based program, right?
It is. I mean, you can
Buff Kit Warehouse. Yeah,
you could. It's web based, but you know, if you want, you can download the software and then download the files and process it locally. But it's easier just to go to the website.
yeah. But Buff Kit, let me tell you what, it's been around for a long time, but it's great.
Yes.
I mean, it is a treasure trove when you're trying to make kind of a decision on where you're going to send crews and your timing and everything else. And so, yeah. And again, we're about 24 hours out from this thing. So it's pretty interesting. So let's see. It looks like I know Jen is out tonight. She's got some writing she had to do for a piece she's working on. Rick Smith is out tonight. Looks like Kim is out as well. So Bill Murray, let me toss it to you and let's bring in our guest. Let's rock and roll. Let's go.
Yeah, James. Tonight's first guest, WeatherBrain, is a friend of the podcast. He appeared on the show back in 2019, twice in 2015, and maybe some other time that I missed. But he's a former deputy chief of staff for the Weather Service and acting chief of staff, president of the NWA at one time, and currently serves as the science and operations officer at the National Weather Service in Boulder. Paul Slatter, welcome back to the show.
Yep, and thanks for having me. I'm really excited to be on this program tonight.
Well, we are too. And Paul, you work in one of the most beautiful places in the country, and I understand you were born there too, right? Did you grow up in that Colorado area?
Yeah, I grew up about a mile from the office where it is right now. And well, my dad is a PhD meteorologist. He's now retired, but he worked at NOAA. So NOAA is in our blood.
Yeah. So was he based there, like in Carr or in the office in Boulder? What did he do?
He did. He moved the family there in 72. So he can claim, a lot of Boulder status there, moving that early. He started at NCAR, then got a job at NOAA working under Sandy McDonald. He retired about 15 years ago.
Oh, that's pretty cool. So it came down through the genes, huh? Or
did.
at least, well, that's awesome. It's great to have you here. And you brought somebody really special with you tonight, a colleague who has a very special role. He joined the National Weather Service in Boulder in late 2021 after 3 years in San Diego. He's the incident meteorologist in Boulder. Bruno Rodriguez, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Bill. Really excited to be here. First time here. Stoked to talk about some fire weather a few hours in advance of the winter storm, Colorado style. So
yeah, getting a little snow this next couple of days, huh?
A little bit. It's been a good November for us.
Well, that's good. Well, talk about your background, Paul, and how you got into weather and how you came to work for the Weather Service.
Well, I think like most everybody on this call, I would assume, I knew I wanted to do that when I was a kid. Easily between the ages of 6 and 8 years old. This was the job that I wanted. I wanted to be work in weather. And then growing up where I grew up, I was fascinated with hailstorms in the Boulder area. And so the storm for me was July 11th, 1990. It was a hailstorm that rolled through eastern Boulder where I was outside hanging with some friends because I was 13 at the time. And then I see this supercell northwest flow coming right at me. I didn't know what the heck one was because I hadn't really seen a supercell before, but as it came, I'm like, that can't be good. I'm like, we're having fun. Let's just hang out a little while longer. Almost right away, we started getting hit by 1 to 1.25 inch hail, and that's when we knew we had to run for it. So we ran. It probably took us a couple minutes to find shelter because we were literally in the open of a wide open football field, not the smartest place to be. Got a few bruises on my shoulder from the hailstorms, but we were safe. And ever since that day, I knew I was into severe weather. I was into radar meteorology. I wanted to go into operational meteorology, just kind of based on my experience of seeing that storm and then looking at it on radar after the fact. And that's kind of what I did. I got into radar meteorology. We got into training and haven't really looked back ever since getting to Boulder the last 6 years as the science and operations officer at the office. where I get to play with all the neat new tools and help forecasters use those tools to make better decisions.
So Paul, you mentioned hailstorms, and Colorado has a tremendous history of hailstorms, and they're pretty impressive.
They are the costliest hail storm or storms ever was actually in Phoenix, the Phoenix metro area. It was a series of supercells, so I know they count that as an event. The second costliest in U.S. history actually occurred May 8th, 2017 in the Denver metro area. That was a single supercell that did all that damage as it trekked across the kind of expensive parts, the high cost parts of Denver, namely car dealerships. It really ravaged the car dealership area in Denver. And then it was a 9 mile wide swath as it moved east across the area. That's why the damage got so high from that one. But so yeah, we're definitely every few years we'll get a serious hailstorm just like that one.
Yeah, that event was quite memorable for sure. When you get that much baseball sized hail over a wide area. And maybe Dr. Neal or somebody else knows. I know around Jackson, Mississippi, they were trying some crazy hail mitigation things a few years ago. Troy, maybe you remember, with some sonic cannons or something. Has there been any successful hail mitigation effort in weather modification that we ever know about?
Not that I know of.
Yeah, I don't think so. The last I've heard of the hail cannons, I think we're
Right in
way
the
back
1800s.
No, I'm talking about Russian scientists. I think at one point that they were kind of looking at that, but I haven't heard anything lately.
Yeah,
I mean, we could talk about that.
Explain the science behind a hail cannon. Somebody, I mean, explain that one too.
I thought it was going to be like a potato gun or something.
Yeah, it looks like one. You look at the old hail. I mean, it had to do with sound waves, right? Am I mistaken? This is what they supposedly said. I think it did. Don't know.
Yeah, so hail's obviously a big thing. Obviously, you get some pretty impressive snows too. There along the in the mountains and the Front Range too, huh?
Absolutely.
And floods. When was the big flood? 2013. Was that the really severe flooding in Boulder? You weren't there then. You weren't there then, were you, Paul?
I was not. I was at headquarters. But yeah, so what had happened was in September of 2013, we got a stalled mesoscale convective vortex, fancy name for just a system that kind of just sits right over Colorado, and it brought in Gulf moisture for about 5 straight days. And in those 5 days, several sites reported about 20 inches of rain. Now, mind you, the average precipitation is between 16 and 18 inches in a lot of these areas that got 20 in 5 days. So just about every stream and river was way out of its banks for several days there. Most houses in the Boulder area, where some of the heaviest rain fell, groundwater came in, and tens of thousands of houses had flooding. It's some form of water damage in it from that event.
Man, how much do you have to worry? Well, I guess do people still remember the 1976 flood, the Big Thompson Canyon flood?
Oh, yeah,
because
definitely.
That storm made a huge impression on me when I was about 14 years old, because I remember waking up the day after or whatever and hearing on the news about this tremendous flooding. And when we were there in Rocky Mountain National Park a few years ago, we went tubing up or rafting up in the canyon there. And you could still see some of the signs, that talked about what to do if there was a flash flood. And you could see why it was so damaging, because those canyons go straight up.
Yeah, the 2013 floods the water didn't get anywhere near as high as during the Big Thompson flash flood in 1976. Most of that was because the Big Thompson flood was 12 inches in about 3.5 hours. The rainfall for the 2013 floods was much more spread out than that.
Mm-hmm. So Bruno, you come to the office in 2021, and you've got tremendous experience with fire, obviously, and then you have a catastrophic event in Boulder that shocked all of us on December 30th and 31st. Talk about the lead up to that storm, or that, I guess it's not really a storm, but really what made it so severe and the impact of the event.
Yeah, I mean, you can talk about lead up too in terms of, I mean, on a monthly scale, because I joined the office in September, and I came from San Diego, and I was shocked. I mean, we had no rain whatsoever in the first like 3 months that I was here. I'm like, what the heck have I done? Why am I here?
Mm.
Um, so, and that really set the stage for something that I think shocked everyone here. I mean, just the context of it, the event itself. I mean, obviously Colorado wasn't immune to fires like that. 2020 was a horrific year, but in the context of the dates, we're talking just a few hours before New Year's Eve. It's just something that we really didn't expect, and really at that time too, most of the attention was on kind of the winter storm that we were expecting just a few hours after the Marshall Fire, the day after, in fact. So that's what really kind of shocked us, I think.
What made the event so severe, and how easy was it to forecast in advance?
It was not easy. We had some pretty clear signals that we were going to be looking at a mountain wave event, which we'd had several that fall already. But really everything had kind of pointed towards your typical kind of foothill locations, areas just east of the divide. And there really wasn't too much to indicate a whole lot of spread east into the kind of urban corridor, locations that can be fairly wind prone as well. Up until, we really got into that high res window. And even then it was really just the HRRR that was mostly focusing those stronger winds a little bit east of the foothills over Boulder. So we really struggled with it. We did have high wind highlights out a couple of days in advance, but not for the specific location where the Marshall Fire actually occurred, at least until the day of, early that morning. So it was a very tricky forecast. I'm not going to lie.
Talk about the fire weather products, and were they used in this situation, or how difficult is it to communicate those, because they've sort of made a transition over the past couple of decades to more of a public facing product, haven't they?
Right. Yeah. So originally, red flag warnings were really designed to be mostly internal to our fire partner agencies. And then over time, they gained more and more traction and ultimately just became a public product. So now there's a little bit more attention on the nomenclature behind it, which is certainly a fair discussion to have. So for the Marshall Fire specifically, there weren't any fire weather headlines out, simply because we didn't expect to meet the criteria that we had established for them. And in fact, we never did meet that criteria. We weren't even all that close, at least when it comes to the humidity thresholds. We had the high wind highlights out in effect. And, Boulder County is one of several counties in Colorado that actually institutes countywide burn bans if you have a high wind watch or a high wind warning in effect. So our fire partners were well aware of the potential, even though there wasn't specifically a fire weather headline out.
Bruno, I've got a question for you. You brought this up just a second ago, but talking about a product that was primarily, at least initially, meant for firefighters or first responders, people like that. Do you think, Bruno, maybe it's a different field there than it is here in South and Central Texas. Do you think the public knows what a red flag warning is? Because that's the product you're going to see or you're going to hear about. I've always wondered, because I realized that term was for firefighters, and now it's been thrust into the public domain. And my question is, does the public get it, you think?
Right. I think they do more and more nowadays. It's become such a public facing product, and we have put a lot of concerted effort into educating the public about what they mean, what the difference is between a watch and a red flag warning. And especially for those folks that live in wildfire prone areas that are more in tune with fire preparedness, I think they, for the most part, have a pretty solid understanding. Not to say that, the naming can be an issue. I think red flag warnings probably stand to be revisited. And there's a lot of discussion to be had.
Well, what about the difference between a red flag warning and we know this down here, as I know y'all know it as well, but Weather Service during the Bastrop flood, our colleagues at the National Weather Service, Austin, San Antonio, during the Bastrop floods went directly to the fire warning, which I think they used at the time. And I'm just wondering if there's is the fire warning, Bruno and Paul Moore, is it meant to be more severe than a red flag warning in a sense?
Yeah, so a fire warning is a very specific type of product. I don't even know that we've ever issued one in Boulder. Paul, you might be able to correct me, but that's really a short fuse product, and it essentially comes from emergency management. It's not something that the weather service would directly be issuing. If you have a fire already on the ground that is expected to produce a really significant threat to life and property, emergency managers may request that we issue a fire warning on their behalf.
Yeah, Troy, for the most part, in our area, our emergency management partners prefer we just issue a civil emergency message, CEM. And it does the same thing. It's basically for evacuations and to alert people that a fire is coming their way or some other emergency.
Well, is there such, and maybe I need to backtrack because maybe I was wrong about this. Is there in the AWIPS files, is there a product called the fire warning or not? Or am I mistaken on that?
It is in there. Yeah. So we do have that option. Yeah. It really just depends on what the emergency managers want. In Colorado, it's always a CEM.
Okay. Thanks.
It's too bad Rick's not here because his office does issue a lot of the fire weather warnings.
Way more experience than they've wanted to have with this, haven't they, James?
Yeah. And my understanding talking to Rick is at least in Norman CWA, that again, it's kind of what the emergency managers prefer. But those are issued when there is an evacuation order.
Yeah.
Which kind of ties back into the civil emergency message nomenclature in there too. My question would be, because we do have some fire weather in eastern Oklahoma. I'm not terribly familiar with it. Most of the time we're more humid than western Oklahoma. It's kind of a curse and a blessing. But can you talk a little bit about that? If HAZSIMP is going to address some of this fire weather advisories and warnings, and then in more specifics, what are the steps going for the thought process of fire weather watch versus red flag warning? Is that just a time frame thing? How does that all work?
Yeah, so as far as the fire weather watches go, it's mostly a lead time type thing, similar to winter storm watch. If you're generally about 50% confident that you're going to be meeting red flag criteria, then you'll go ahead and provide a bit more of a heads up to partners and to the public. As for sort of kind of the future, where we might be going with it, I think discussions are pretty much centered on sort of more of a matrix or sliding scale approach to things. I don't know necessarily that HAZSIMP is going to be that integrated onto the fire weather side of things. I think fire weather headlines are a little bit unique compared to a lot of different weather headlines, and that the criteria especially are really closely tied to our fire agency partners, and that's something that we work very closely with them in the development of. Not to say that that's not the case with other types of winter or weather hazards, but especially for fire hazards, that's something that it's heavily dependent on partner input.
Yeah, and I was just going to add to what Bruno said. In case it wasn't clear to the viewers out there, red flag warning conditions are variable depending on the climate zone that you're in, essentially. We probably have the most liberal parameters for wind speed and relative humidity, just because we're so dry and so windy in Colorado. You go further east out to Tulsa's area, they have much higher thresholds for relative humidity and lower wind speed thresholds than we have for our red flag warnings. So you can see, if you get outside of your area, you may have to adjust your thresholds and your understanding of what a red flag warning really means. I mean, the impacts are the same, don't start a fire, but the conditions that form those conditions obviously are a little different.
But is this a case, Paul and Bruno, where the parameters needed to be lower and you kind of have to use your human gut forecasting side to predict something like this? Or was it just one of those, black sheep events that, it's hard to see coming?
I'll see what Bruno thinks about this, but I would say for the Marshall Fire in particular, everything's hindsight, but given how strong the winds were and how dry the fuels were, we would have been perfectly happy issuing a red flag warning on top of a high wind warning. That's something we would probably do in the future. Now, the outcome probably wouldn't have changed because burn bans go into effect either way. With our high wind warning, that was going to be the case. But I think Bruno agreed. Bruno, you can talk or respond in just a second, but Marshall Fire changed a few things for our office where winds that strong, we almost say the heck with relative humidity. A fire is going to go absolutely crazy with winds gusting 100 miles per hour or even 60 miles per hour. Bruno, what do you think about all that?
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And this kind of ties back to this idea of what the red flag warning of the future might look like, right? I mentioned kind of this matrix or sliding scale approach. And I think there's maybe one or two forecast offices out west that have started to experiment with that a little bit. But, right now, most of the 122 forecast offices out there have kind of a single fixed criteria based on primarily humidity and winds. So really, we're working closely with DRI, Desert Research Institute in Nevada, to try and develop sort of this matrix approach where, like Paul mentioned, for those stronger wind scenarios, you start to gradually become a little bit less restrictive with the relative humidity thresholds. And I think that certainly applies to the Marshall Fire, and it's a perfect example of kind of a lessons learned sort of scenario.
Do you have any difference when you're dealing with advisories and messaging, or are we good enough to know we're looking at more of an urban setting, a wildland urban interface setting, or a wildland setting? And then the follow-up to that is, what's the ignition source for most of your fires?
I think that's really hard to say. In terms of kind of differentiating between urban and rural, I think, again, a lot of these events, they're gonna impact both types of, or all types of kind of land uses and rural versus urban. Marshall Fire, if you were to put yourself in the shoes of folks there, I mean, we're talking northwest suburbs. It's a pretty urban environment. Yes, they're surrounded by grasslands and such, but when you kind of zoom out big picture, in terms of wildfire risk, it really didn't stand out on a map. The areas of Superior, Louisville, compared to a lot of areas, for example, in the foothills, that also saw those winds. And at the end of the day, a lot of it's just luck of the draw. Where are you going to get that ignition? And that's something that we can't predict.
What caused the actual fire? Because usually, you can trace it back to some careless act or something, or power line sparking or something like that. Is it?
It's still being looked into. I think they have two primary theories, and there's actually a possibility that it could have been two different sources within the span of about 40 minutes to an hour. So they're looking at, I believe, a shed or something on fire on a property as one potential source, and then also some underground mine fires that are still actually ongoing in the Rocky Flats area. And I think there have been some past wildfires that have been started precisely by high wind events that kick up some underground fires, and there you go, it rages through the grasslands. So those, I think, are the two primary things we're looking into, but they haven't established anything yet.
I think we were, obviously you're in the holiday season, you're getting close to New Year's, and just having come through Christmas, we were shocked, nationally to see this happening. Talk about the toll, and I mean, because it was, there were a substantial number of structures that were destroyed, right?
Over 1,000, yep. Most destructive fire in state history. So, we often kind of think of the 2020 fires in Colorado as being some of the worst, which in a lot of ways they were. Hundreds of thousands of acres. But it was the Marshall Fire, just 6 to 8 hours of rapid fire spread that ended up making it the most destructive in state history. So yeah, over 1,000, and it's a miracle. Only 2 people were killed in that. Which
that was my follow up. just 2 fatalities. What do you attribute that to? Is there good awareness of fire potential during wind events within the community?
I think that's partially the case, and I think it's also, the environment that it occurred in. This was suburbia, so in terms of evacuation routes, I think there were quite a few options to people. If you think about other events that have been very fatal, like the Camp Fire in California in 2018, I think, those are mountain communities that oftentimes maybe only have one evacuation route, and you're trying to evacuate a town of 20, 30,000 people on one road. So I think that really helped, and emergency services, I think, did just an overall phenomenal job. Obviously the focus wasn't on fire suppression. There was nothing to do. The focus was on just getting people out.
Yeah, the first responders were the real heroes in this event, because they were going door to door, probably 20 minutes before the houses caught fire, and they had megaphones and everything, and doing that whole deal in in the first neighborhood that was really under threat from this, and they just it happened. There was a lot of luck attributed to this. We've had several, home videos of people just, hanging around as long as they possibly could. And then once that wave hits you, it's a gust of embers and everything. Once the house caught fire, it took 7 minutes to take the whole thing. That's how fast this was moving. So I think some people waited to the last second when those burning embers, whooshed in on those 100-mile-per-hour gusts on their house. Then they were gone, and luckily they were able to get out even despite their house had just lit fire from that. So I think there was a lot of luck in there too. What definitely helped was social media presence. People were aware of evacuations through that, and also having smoke come at you and feeling 100-mile-per-hour winds as smoke's coming at you. That's a pretty good social cue, visual cue that something is not quite right about this. A lot of people left just because they were, the wind plus all that smoke coming right at them.
I've got a question on power and fires and evacuations, but before I get into that and before I forget, I used to work with your dad on the Ruck model doing TAMDAR data simulation. This is probably 20 years ago with Stan Benjamin and Bill Moninger, and those are some fun times. And all this talk of red flags reminded me of something you're probably familiar with in your Silver Spring days, which are 3 things memos and the red flag part of those. So hopefully this isn't a red flag on a 3TM, but I've got a question related to either preemptive power shutdowns or just straight up loss of power due to these fires, and a rash of people that were issued an evacuation order who couldn't get their garage doors open. And the thought never crossed my mind until I heard that people were calling 911. And then when, my mom lives in Charleston, and when there was a hurricane earlier this year, bearing down on her house, I made sure, she knew how to manually open the garage door in case she lost power. But was that something that was new to people, or is that expected? I mean, I think people are starting to realize it's an issue now, but what was sort of the story behind that?
Luckily in the Marshall fire, believe it or not, I mean, it wasn't caused by a downed power line. They ruled that out. And amazingly, those houses, the first houses that really caught fire just after noon, 12:30, they still had power right until their house caught fire. So in theory, they were making preparations, packing the car, getting the pets in there with enough time to do that. I didn't hear, Bruno can also chime in, but I didn't hear of any issues with power outages during the evacuation. Obviously there was a lot of power out after the fire roared through the area, but during evacuation, I don't think we didn't hear any issues of people having issues getting out of the garage door. Bruno?
I think I might have heard one story about an older lady that had issues trying to get out of her garage, but it's not, I mean, to your point, Neil, yeah, it's been a recurring issue in a few fires. I remember, I think there were a few fatalities attributed to that in the 2017 North Bay fires. So and it's something we try to educate people on. I actually, one of the social media posts that we shared the day of the Marshall Fire was precisely explaining how to open, a garage door manually. Just that would be an issue. So it's definitely a problem in some cases.
I mean, it's a huge problem in California with PG&E preemptively cutting power on these high fire risk days. Kim's here now. I mean, the interesting wildfire point about vulnerability. One thing that we have in common, nearly all of these natural type disasters, is that if you're a little higher risk if you're lower socioeconomic status, but wildfire is definitely the exception to that in the West, because so many people that can pay the premium to live on that wildland urban interface. And it's spectacular, except when it burns.
Yeah, I think Kim I think I was alerted to the fires that day because of one of Kim's tweets, or maybe a email to the WeatherBrains crew. Kim, have y'all studied the social science side of this in any of your circles?
Fire is a really interesting one because there are a lot of agencies that are part of the landscape of communicating about fire threat. It's not just NOAA. So interestingly, the social science community around fire is a little bit more divided than for other weather-related hazards. And there is a fire social science community. They come to AMS every so often. And I think that there might be a talk or two that pertain to this event at the upcoming AMS annual meeting. But it's not something that I've done work directly in. It's something that our team has incidentally come across some as we've done work with developing lightning products. That's something NSSL does a lot of work with, and we've gone out and done IWT meetings in places where we learn a lot about local concerns about fire and just how incredibly data sparse a lot of the environments are that emergency management's working in for a lot of fire concerns. It's just a very different landscape, and it's in the physical science and also in the social science.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting with the number of huge events we've had. And we're going to get into more of the IMET portion of what you do here in a second, Bruno. But James was going to raise a question about mitigation and resilience. James asked that.
It's a big deal in California with fire awareness, and there's probably a little bit more of a defined fire season in California. I may be wrong. It probably is there too in a way. But how many people have experience with wildfires to the point that they make it a step every year to have defensible space to plant vegetation away from their house that's not going to lead to burning under their eaves, things like that, boxing in their eaves, just all the homeowner mitigation steps that can be taken? Do you have much compliance with that?
Bruno, I can start. At the urban interface where the Marshall Fire occurred, there wasn't a whole lot of that, as evidenced by wooden fences on that interface catching fire, and then the embers from that would spread to the house. They had numerous cases where a wooden fence was the primary cause of that house downwind catching fire. Away from that interface, which this was the first time anything like this has occurred, at least in that area, in the foothills where we've got dry pine trees and dry grasses, and fires are an annual thing for them. Absolutely, they're in compliance in those areas, just west of Denver, up in the foothills. Bruno, what about your experience in California and also in Colorado?
Yeah, I think very similar overall, maybe a little bit more overall attention in California. But again, I think anyone that lives in kind of the typical wildfire prone area in the foothills here on the Front Range is absolutely in compliance, and they're very in tune when it comes to preparedness. But there's definitely more work to be done, especially for these areas that are less at risk, but we're seeing year after year that it's not a non-zero risk.
Yeah, and even here in the Southeast a few years ago with the flash drought in October, we had fires in Alabama, and of course it was a very devastating fire in the Gatlinburg area of eastern Tennessee that was occurring as we were recording this show that night. And it was shocking to see some of the video coming out of there. I remember my grandparents were really afraid of fire in the 1960s and 1970s, and I think I've tied it back to a drought that happened in Alabama in the late 1950s. James, it was another one of those flash drought type things, and they had a lot of fires in that October period. And because I used to remember there being fire towers and them being on fire watch and things whenever it was dry, and then we kind of got away from that for a long time until that flash drought. And I tell you, it put me seriously on edge. And we've been through, obviously, tornadoes and winter storms and lots of big events here, but I think fire had a bigger, scare factor for me, and maybe because it's more of a rare thing, like being at the, in DC during the earthquake. That thing scared the stew out of me. I remember one of my favorite things is this, meme after, a plastic chair knocked over and it said, "We will rebuild," but that was a serious event too. So maybe it's things you're less familiar with, but Paul, these things come so fast. You were mentioning in the chat there about, the rapidity of evacuations.
Yeah, it's like evacuating from a tornado, which I know we won't touch that topic, right? But in a fire, you have to evacuate. You're not sheltering in place when this type of fire is coming your way. You got to get out of there with just the clothes on your back and whatever you can fit in your car. And like I said, if you waited too long, and a lot of people sure did, we saw plenty of reports of that. Literally 10 minutes is all you have to grab whatever you can, and then it'll be gone. You'd lose it all. But at least you have your life and hopefully your pets too. Although a lot of pets didn't get out either, unfortunately. It would happen so fast.
Now, I know that, when you're, one of the firefighters out in the woodlands, you've got that emergency, blanket you can, jump under as a last resort, some other steps, Bruno, you can talk about, but you can't really build a shelter in a home that that you could survive in, could you? Or is that even possible?
I don't know that it is really. I mean, and again, a lot of the homes that are probably more susceptible to fire, in many cases, may not even have, basements like we do in the plains, which theoretically, I guess, would be the most secure spot in the event of a fire. But I wouldn't even want to be in a basement if my house catches fire. No, it's terrifying. It really is.
So evacuation by car or whatever is about the only way you can get away from it.
Yeah, picture this. The fire got so hot and it was fanned by so much wind. When those first row of houses on the west side of a neighborhood caught fire, the radiant heat from those row of houses spread to the other houses. In other words, it got so hot in between one house to the next. Open flame didn't do it. It was literally just the heat from the house that's on fire spread to the next one, spread to the next one, and then you had the catastrophe that you had. That's how hot this fire got fueled by the wind. It didn't even need embers to spread to the next house. It was done by radiation in a lot of cases.
Yeah, that's scary stuff. Kim and Neil are commenting there about the sheltering in place, some of the difficulties. Neil, did you want to add something?
Yeah, I was just thinking about like how would you design a shelter and not have it turn into a kiln or something that would run out of oxygen. I can't. Maybe if you had like something way underground with stored oxygen and it'd be more expensive than your house. It's a lot better just to leave.
Push the smoke out too at the same time, because that smoke would be so intense, not to mention the heat. Yeah, this is just the stuff of nightmares for me, for sure. Not fun to talk about. I was particularly taken by the Paradise Fire. The Camp Fire, I guess is what it was called, that hit Paradise, California. And I guess you studied that pretty closely, Bruno. Any takeaways from it that are useful?
There was a service assessment done within the Weather Service after that one, as you would imagine. That was a huge event. And there were, a couple key takeaways. A lot of those kind of related to, fire danger messaging, red flag warnings. Um, and, you know, a lot of that related to kind of differentiating between different severity levels with red flag warnings. And this is something we've heard of a little bit from partners over the years. And this is what's really driven, you know, some of you might be familiar with the kind of recent efforts, at least in California, to introduce basically PDS wording, particularly dangerous situation, right? Similar to a PDS tornado watch. Same concept, but introducing that into the fire world to really help folks differentiate an event that has the potential to be historic, and that campfire was absolutely one of those historic events. But yeah, that one is not one that I'm ever going to forget. And I know the IMETs that were on that fire aren't forgetting that one either. There were over 80 fatalities with that. In a matter of a couple of hours, and it's just a perfect example of an ignition in the very wrong spot in the worst of conditions, and next
Chaotic communication,
evacuation route.
right? And you know, it seems to me to be exciting that people are building back, because I know there was a lot of community pride in that town. There was a great film a couple of years ago about it. And I hear they're building back, you know, to James Adelot's point, they're building back in a much more resilient fashion. Or, you know, are you studying that at all? Is that working into what's happening in Colorado?
Yeah, no, I haven't studied that specifically, but that's something that's definitely recurring, and we're definitely going to see that here. The Marshall Fire and homes being built to higher standards after this. There's no question.
Well, you know, you mentioned your IMET friends, and you're an IMET. So talk about that role. What do the IMETs do when they're, you know, on site on a fire?
Sure. So basically, IMETs are fully integrated into what we call the incident management teams that help manage these incidents. So we work hand in hand with the incident commanders, the planning section on a fire, you know, with their long days or 16-hour days with no breaks. I mean, you're talking, you know, 14 days straight usually for most dispatches. But it's a great program, and it's one that's actually been around for a while. I think the first dispatch, IMET dispatch, wasn't called IMET, I don't think, back in the day, but I think it was all the way back in 1928. And then 1930s, they had like a few vans decked out with fire weather equipment. So it's a pretty old program within the agency, which I think is kind of testament to how valued it is by the emergency management community and incident management teams. But it's super rewarding experience, definitely the highlight of my career. And we're a family, and a rapidly growing one too. I think we're up to around 80 certified IMETs right now, and 30 trainees, which I think is a record for the size of the trainee group. So it's really cool to see.
So this is something that meteorologists that are interested in can apply for, or are they chosen because of special skill set, Bruno?
No, you're not necessarily picked out. It's something that you know, if you feel like it's something you want to do, then you can do it. And most of us are National Weather Service forecasters. I think there are one or two IMS out there that maybe you work with a GAC or with one of the fire agencies. But we're all, you know, forecasters at the office for the most part as a day job. There are a couple of WCMs out there. They're actually IMETs as well. So yeah, I learned about it when I was volunteering at the Atlanta office. Steve Nelson, shout out to the Sue there. He kind of planted the seed in my brain. First time he mentioned it, I knew that that's exactly what I wanted. So ever since then, it's been kind of beelining towards towards the IMET program for me.
So what are some of the biggest fires you've worked, Bruno? Besides obviously the one that was in your backyard.
Sure. So, you know, what's interesting and what keeps it kind of fun is that every fire is just so different. You know, I was on the Hermit's Peak, Calf Canyon down in New Mexico early this year, and that was obviously a big one. And then last year I was on the Dixie Fire, although I was the last IMET there. So by the time I arrived, there really wasn't any fire on the ground. I mean, it was, you know, one or two tree stumps here and there that were smoldering, but that one was memorable for me because they had a record-breaking AR move in while I was there. They had 12 inches of rain on the fire. So that was just a completely different experience to most other IMET dispatches that I've had. You know, it's basically debris flow alert at that point. So that one stuck in my brain.
So did a good winter storm come and squash down the Marshall Fire, or was it already out by the time that happened?
Yeah, I mean, the winds died down pretty quickly that evening, so they were already starting to get a pretty good handle on it, you know. And it's grass, so that by that point they were mostly just dealing with kind of lingering structure fires. But yeah, I mean, the winter storm the next day was just the nail in the coffin. I think we got a good, probably a solid 7 to 8 inches out of that one in like the Superior area. So yeah, the 24-hour difference pictures are pretty mesmerizing.
Is a grassland wildfire easier to fight than one in a forest? I mean, intuitively it would seem it would, but it doesn't mean they're any less severe.
No, not at all. I mean, I think the saving grace with grass fires is they're usually much quicker, right? They're usually tied to some kind of extreme wind event, a frontal passage or something, and as soon as those winds die down, you can very quickly get a wrap around it, get hose laying around it. So in that sense, they are easier. But during the height of the winds, as we saw in the Marshall Fire, it can be just as destructive as, you know, one in the thick of the forest.
I've got a question on the debris flow issue. So how long after a burn, like how long are the burn scars subject to sort of mudslides, debris flows? And is there some sort of mitigation strategy after the fact? I mean, do people go in and try to get vegetation started again, or did the plants just die down to the stump and come back from the root?
Yeah, I mean, it varies a lot depending on the fire too. You know, obviously a more intense fire, greater the soil burn severity, probably the longer that's going to be an issue. In some cases, it may just be 1 or 2 seasons. In some cases, it could be as many as maybe 5 or 6 years that you're looking at potential debris flow impacts. And yeah, I mean, there are some strategies that you can implement. You can do some seeding, try and regenerate the vegetation a little bit quicker, create a few banks and channels, and clear out channels a little bit. But especially once you get into some of these massive fires that burn hundreds of thousands of acres, I mean, you just have so much terrain that it really doesn't matter. There's always going to be the potential for significant impacts no matter what you do.
Can you talk a little bit about fine fuels, coarse fuels, how that goes into fire weather forecasting?
Yeah, so that's a good question. You know, obviously, again, when we talk about, you know, red flags and red flag criteria, a key component of that is going to be the fuel conditions, and that's sometimes kind of overlooked, especially by the public. But it's something that we rely really heavily on when it comes to our fire partners. They're ultimately the ones that have the most expertise when it comes to fuel conditions, so we rely on them heavily when it comes to that. But yeah, I mean, there's just so much variety too, just like weather when it comes to fuel conditions. Different fuel types are going to react differently or be susceptible in different ways. You know, Marshall Fire, a lot of fine fuel types, grassy. So in general, those finer fuel types react much quicker to changing weather conditions, right? We call them kind of 1 hour fuels, meaning they take about an hour for their moistures to react to changing atmospheric conditions, right? So even if maybe you had some rain preceding it, if you have a really dry, windy day, that can easily create a really susceptible environment if you're just dealing with fine fuels. Whereas heavier fuels typically takes much longer, prolonged period of drought, for example, to help get those fuels in play.
And Bruno, how important are the SPC products? Like here, you know, we're clued in heavily to the SPC severe weather outlooks and the weather, the WPC there. excessive rainfall outlooks. And I know that the fire weather has become an important part of what goes on there in the National Weather Center with the Storm Prediction Center.
Right. Yeah, I mean, they're useful, especially on a national scale. I think for partners that are looking at things nationally or regionally, those outlooks can definitely be useful, and also helps when it comes to kind of creating a consistent message. Probably what helps us most, though, are going to be things like the excessive rainfall outlooks when it comes to debris flows, debris flow potential. That's a big one. But yeah, it's just an extra tool in the toolbox, really, for us.
During the Marshall Fire, how did people get notification of evacuations? Was it television, radio? And then how quickly did your local media outlets spin up? I presume everybody was in continuous coverage at some point in this, but how quickly did they just kind of go into emergency mode that day?
I think it was very quick. I mean, Paul, you might have a better idea, but I mean, as far as emergency notifications go, I think it kind of ran the full gamut. I mean, there were folks that relied on social media. Boulder OEM was great with pushing out updates to their webpage. They had kind of an interactive GIS map for evacuation zones going. I do believe there were some, reverse 911 calls. And for those that had signed up to kind of county alert notifications, they would have gotten them to their phones as well. And then a lot of others that didn't get any notification, and they just decided on their own accord that, yeah, it's about time to get out of here.
Yeah, and I guess that's an interesting question to me. Do the broadcasters use those fire weather outlooks from SPC in advance of events? Because y'all got something in southeastern Colorado going right now, I guess. Maybe it's not in your CWA, but down into eastern New Mexico and the Texas Panhandle with this big system moving through.
In at least in Colorado, in our experience, the most popular things for the media to show are red flag warnings and the fire weather watches. So those two products from the local WFO. Just last April, I think we issued like 16 of them, Bruno. I think we might have broke a record for most in 1 month. But throughout that process, the media, I mean, they were all over. They were asking us, "Hey, is it going to be another red flag day?" And we said, "Yep, get ready. We're going to issue another one." And I mean, because it was, other than that, there wasn't any severe weather. They were happy to talk about red flag warnings because the Marshall Fire just happened. So of course, fire is fresh in everyone's mind. So it was a very popular thing. But yeah, it's mainly the local products that the media in Colorado are focused on.
So James Spann, does Barron put those fire weather products in their systems or whatever other graphic systems y'all are using?
They do at our place here. We have the Barron links, and if you go in there, there's a check box. You click on fire, and those products come up. James, you got links or WSI? What do you got?
We're WSI, and it's the same thing. It's just kind of selectable by advisory type.
James Spann, you had a question.
Yeah, in the tornado business, we live in a world of POD and FAR. POD is probability of detection, and FAR is false alarm ratio. Do you keep track of this with fire weather forecasts, your POD and FAR by chance?
We do, yeah. And, the tricky thing is, a lot of people like to think of false alarm ratios, I guess, in terms of, well, was there a fire or not? That's not really how it works with fires. It's not like a winter storm or tornado outbreak or something where we know things are going to happen. It's not the case with fires. So, yeah, we can verify with the conditions that we observe with the weather stations on the ground and make sure that we did meet the red flag criteria that we expected to meet. But, a lot of times people, I guess, maybe get lulled into complacency when you have kind of red flag after red flag and nothing happens. Doesn't mean we have a high FAR, right?
Mm-hmm.
Challenge.
Just a high lucky factor.
Right. And I think we ran into that this spring, like Paul said, March, April. I mean, we had, I think, back-to-back months with record red flag warnings, and we were getting questions about warning fatigue and such. So it's something that we need to think about.
Yeah, and we're happy that there's no fires that start on these days.
Mm-hmm.
And Part of it is it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. When we issue a red flag warning, entities like the Colorado Department of Transportation specifically send out messaging to all of their employees to avoid things that would cause sparks. And there's a lot of different CDOT activities that they perform that can cause a spark. They shut all that off the instant we issue a red flag warning. So in theory, that has helped, but you still can't stop other people in the public from just wanting to burn something. Of course, nothing really stops that.
Well, Paul, you can let your Department of Transportation know that James A. Lot is available if they need some pithy messaging for their roadside display, sort of like New Jersey had. He wrote all those, and he's been banned in New Jersey, so they may not have heard about that in Colorado yet. Our favorite one was our show title from last week, "Get Your Head Out of Your Apps," which was our favorite one. It looks like Kim is winning the battle now.
Yay!
That's good. You're back, and we're still talking about this terrible fire thing that scares all of us senseless. Kim, y'all have had a lot of experience with it in the last few years. I wish Rick were here tonight because dealt with some crazy stuff, and it. Like James was saying in the pre-show, it didn't seem to used to be that way. We have fires now that we never had before.
It's an interesting thing to adapt to. And being from the upper Midwest, it wasn't in, my background. It was definitely an interesting thing. I encountered it first when I came here for grad school. We had just about everything in the first couple of years of the 2000s. When I came out here, we had the tropical storm that reformed an eye over land because we'd had so much rain, we became a rainforest jungle. And the year before that had been so dry that we were just besieged by wildfires. So we get it all here. And it's an interesting thing to learn to live with, because when you have those fire weather days, it really is, Paul, what you were talking about, just people doing even the most random of things, can ignite a fire, and it spreads so quickly. That's one of the things that's so difficult. It spreads so fast. Detection for it used to be so poor, and at least we have some satellite guidance now to help us find where there are fires that aren't immediately obvious in an urban area. But here we have fires that start off of the highway. There's a highway that borders town to the south. A lot of the big high fire risk days are wind blowing in from the south. And if there's just someone who throws their cigarette out of the car window, you can get a big fire. And Norman is, it's called, the moniker is the city of trees. We have a lot of vegetation here that's native, but we also have a lot of invasive species. One of the more charming invasive species was brought here when they were trying to figure out how to ameliorate the effects of the Dust Bowl, and they introduced the red cedar in those little hedgerows to try to make little windbreaks. Well, those little suckers are absolutely the worst thing you could possibly ask for in a landscape that is very fragile with respect to its water balance. It has a very long, shallow root system, so it sucks up the water really quickly, and it causes flash drought. And then when it dries up itself, it's just a little crystalline sap column ready to explode. So when those things catch on fire, they don't just burn quietly and go off into the night. They explode, and they send their flaming sap everywhere into that wind. And so we just have this extraordinary recipe now for catastrophe anytime that the conditions are right. And we have exacerbated the flash drought risk, and then we exacerbate the fire risk with the change of the landscape. So yeah, adapting to that is so crazy. I had a lot of times in grad school that we'd abandon the weather center. We'd know that there was a fire nearby, and we'd all pour out to see how far it was and whose home was at risk. And people would run out to try to save what they could, if they could. And it is to someone originally from outside of Chicago, it is the most bizarre thing that I've ever had to deal with. And I have a whole plan. I mean, because it is one of the things that we fear the most, I have a whole plan for how we can try to get out if we have to, because I live at the urban wildland interface in Norman, abutting a bunch of trees. It was a choice that I knew I was making. And so we have plans, but I know that everything is fragile. And it's one of the, after I left to go back to into battle with my 3-month-old, I was thinking about the conversation we were having, and from a response perspective, just how difficult fires are. And I think that fires are probably the toughest because of the limited detectability in time for you to do anything about it, the difficulty in conveying where it's moving, the to anyone who you can even reach, because we don't do a great job discussing fire through a lot of the communication channels we have. And then having something you can even do, having a place you can go. That's a pretty advanced cartographic exercise, I guess. And especially if you live in a hilly landscape where roads aren't just north, south, east, west. I mean, I'm thinking of the Paradise Fire. All of that stuff was in play in that fire. And I think about that fire and think about how would I have done. I have absolutely no idea. Probably not well. And yeah, I think this is a really tough conversation to have, in part because it's a hazard we don't like to think about. But yeah, it is a really, really tough one, and an important one to forecast for and communicate for well. And our guests tonight, I think the things you're doing are so helpful. And back to James's future profession of making the catchy, pithy signs on the side of the road. I mean, don't discount that. That stuff, it's really important. Get that attention. Help people know that today is a different day from all the other days. When you live in a place that's kind of gets to be a dry landscape, it can be tough to tell one day from another day. And I don't know. I mean, what's your experience of it been, James? It sounds like you feel like it is happening a little bit more, and you're a little bit more of a native Okie than I am. I mean, how is the adaptation to this, just living in a place like this? I feel like we're sort of on the borderline where fires are more and less common, and it's starting to shift to be more common.
Yeah, I think that's the case. I think 2 or 3 years ago, when we had ample rain way out in the Texas Panhandle, and I mean, you can kind of almost track the fire risk by the dry line location, and it's definitely. I mean, again, it's sample size 1. It just seems like there have been a lot more fires. Maybe we're paying closer attention and trying to get out ahead of these, and not just throwing our hands up and saying, it's somebody else burning off a field, when it may be more than that. But, gosh, 2011, 2012, 2013 were terrible fire years that even got over here, too.
Yeah. So Bruno, are you taking notes up there? James A is a veritable font of great sign material there. But I liked yours, Paul Slater. That wasn't bad. Are you going to hand that one off to the department?
Yeah, it's catchy. Hold on to your butts. Don't throw them out the window.
Show title.
Exactly. And James Ace, don't be an ash, tie up your chains. That's pretty darn good. Dr. Neal mentioned, Smokey the Bear. We grew up in my generation with Smokey the Bear being a really, really big deal. And I guess there's some, that sort of gave it a soft approach, that messaging when you went into a national forest or somewhere, with that day's fire danger. And it never occurred to me that there would be warning fatigue about fire weather, because it's just one of those long-term events like a drought, that it could last for weeks and months. That's what makes it so terrible. Is that still used at all in your fire weather program, Bruno?
It's out there, but I mean, like you said, especially when it comes to warning fatigue, I think we need to kind of shift the focus a little bit away from just repeating the same old message, posting the same old graphic with a red flag warning and saying, "Hi, fire danger. These are the winds and the relative humidity." I think this spring, when we had kind of 15 or so red flag warnings for 2 consecutive months, we really try to kind of switch things up. And maybe something as simple as just focusing on one little tidbit of preparedness each day, right? One day you can focus on defensible space. Another day you can focus on how to open a garage door from the inside. Simple things like that can give folks something different to focus on that isn't necessarily the same repetitive message, I think can help with warning fatigue.
I was just in chat asking if you guys, while I had been doing that battle with the 3-month-old, if you had talked about just the name itself, red flag warning. And he said that you guys have touched on it. So, I'm glad that you're having that conversation. I'm wondering if you feel like where you are, do you feel like there is a really good societal adoption of red flag warning in some places, like maybe the Intermountain West? Maybe people know what that is more than some other places, because I'm not really sure here if people hear that and even know what it refers to, where a lot of our warnings have just the hazard type in the title. It's very plain language. This one is definitely not. And just that, anything you have that's a hurdle, if you're using the warning name as a major communication technique, like if you're focusing on that attribute of the information, giving it primacy, and people have no idea what the red flag is. I mean, here they might think it's an OU flag, like, oh, we're talking about football. I mean, let's be honest. I would not put it past 50% of this population sooner, even though we keep losing tragically. It's been a little bit more like watching Purdue, my other alma mater, this year. And I've just been telling all of my OU fans that it's survivable, these losses. But yes, Boomer.
But you're in the Big Ten championship, aren't you? I mean, this is like big deal.
We won the Big Ten West, which is really awful, but we did win it. So good job, us. It is better. We have a better record than OU right now, which is mind-blowing. But thank you.
Yeah, that's funny. Well, Bruno, talk a minute about, how much I spend time studying fires like the South Canyon fire, which always, to me, is, another one of those just terrible disasters with the loss of those firefighters.
Yeah, I mean, we as IMS, one of our main focuses is to just stay in kind of fire season mentality year round. And we have an annual workshop in Boise every year, get together and review important case studies, catch up on important software updates, and just general training. And then, one thing that's also helping us kind of keeping in that fire weather mindset year round is prescribed burn support as well, which is sort of a new thing. And I think in the past, maybe a year or two, there was a formal agreement signed between the U.S. Forest Service and NOAA for IMS support for prescribed fires, to formalize that and enable IMS to provide more dedicated support for those kind of efforts, which are often kind of obviously off season, during the winter, spring months. So that's also key as well.
Now, are you in charge of like a fire weather program in your office? Is that separate from what the WCM does, or are y'all integrated in that process?
Yeah, so we do have a general program area, fire weather program area, which I lead. And obviously a lot of that is integrated with what the WCMs do with the office as well. But a lot of what I do is kind of focused on, first of all, training for forecasters, any kind of forecast drills, or training on potential software or revision of criteria. And even for outside of the office, outreach type things, meetings with fire agencies, or training for wildland firefighters. We do a lot of kind of basic introductory weather meteorology courses for wildland firefighters, which are really essential when it comes to them being able to interpret what products we give them when we are on a fire, as I meant. And that's always a really fun part of the fire weather program, teaching those classes.
So talk about that training for the forecasters. What are they looking to you to provide them if they're not as well versed in fire? And I guess after they've been there a while, they probably would. And is that something you pick them on in terms of a skill set, Paul, when your office brings them to Boulder?
Yeah, I mean, one thing, for example, would be that kind of subjective forecaster element when it comes to those marginal decisions that, like the Marshall Fire, maybe fall out of our strict criteria. So, one of the changes that we've had since the Marshall Fire is to kind of open up that discussion within our office and say, hey, you know what, there are going to be situations that don't fall within the criteria that we have established now. Yes, those criteria are probably going to change in the coming years. We're looking into ways to do that. But in the time being, here is how we can approach those marginal situations and high wind events. Here is when we might want to incorporate PDS warning into a red flag warning and where we might not want to do that.
Paul,
Yeah,
talk about the water. Oh, I'm sorry, Paul. Go ahead. Keep that conversation going.
I was going to answer your question about what we look for when we
Yeah.
hire meteorologists. In Bruno's case, 100%. He's a rock star in fire weather, and we knew we had to have him in our office. So we're very fortunate to have him in our office. Outside of Bruno,
Bidding war.
yeah, exactly. Outside of people like Bruno, and I'm sure everyone will agree because a lot of you on this call work with students. The quality of the younger generation getting into the weather service is just unbelievable how good they are. And so even if they don't know anything about fire weather, we know they have the skills that they'll be able to pick it up. They'll be able to pick up the communication aspect of that. So we're very comfortable training whoever we bring on into our office.
That's pretty cool. So, Paul, talk about. Well, I guess we could get NIL working in the meteorologist program. We might get that going, Kim. Maybe you should work on that in Norman a little bit. I think that's a really important comment that you said, Paul. The quality of the students today is so superior. That's so exciting. It's not good for, I guess it's good in one way, but makes it a little tougher from a competition standpoint. But talk about the water situation in Colorado. We're of course, worried about the Southwest and water. What's the situation like there, and is it completely tied to the snow season in the mountains, or what other factors are involved?
A lot of it definitely is. I mean, believe it or not, some of our most popular tweets when there isn't a winter storm coming is the snowpack. People just eat that stuff up here. And it's for good reason, because if you have a strong snowpack, your reservoirs will be full. People have water to water their plants, and fire weather isn't as big a concern if you have a really strong snowpack. It can delay the start of the fire season. So just a lot of good comes out of building that snowpack this winter. And we're in a triple dip La Nina, and so we don't have too many of those in recent history to look back on to understand what kind of precipitation patterns might favor or not favor Colorado. But suffice to say, it's not even close. This year compared to last year, we are infinitely better than we were water-wise and snow-wise and fire weather risk-wise than last year at this time. So we're actually quite excited about how much snow has fallen just in the cities, urban areas, and in the mountains so far.
So that means a good ski season.
So far it's for early season, it's excellent. Yes.
Well, that makes me feel better because as our listeners may know, and you guys certainly are aware, the AMS annual meeting is in Denver this year. And usually with the AMS annual meeting comes a curse of some kind with the weather surrounding it or during the week of. And I looked at us putting Denver on the schedule and I was worried, the first thing you think about, of course, is snow. And we can't count that out. We might have difficulty getting to or from the conference. But you also worry about fire because you do get quite a bit of your fire threat that happens in the winter months sometimes. So how are you guys feeling about the AMS annual coming to town? Does this present any special opportunities for your office and any special worries about the AMS curse?
Well, gosh, I hope not. I mean, January is the driest month in Denver, so we got that going for us. It's also one of the sunniest months that we have going for us. But it can be just about anything, though. It can be more often than not, it's really windy. So we do get January is our windiest month when we can get some downslope winds and that kind of thing. So that we have to watch out for. Heavy snows are rare, but they can obviously happen. And knowing the AMS week, we'll probably get one like Sunday. Let's hope not, but we could get one that first Sunday in Denver when people are trying to fly there. But it's usually pretty pleasant weather setup in January. I think people will be pleasantly surprised if all goes according to normal, I guess is the way to put it.
I am going to quote you. I am going to quote you that you are now on the line. People will be pleasantly surprised. It's going to be like blizzard warning, abutting a tornado warning.
with a
As
wildfire.
we try to navigate by the deep forest with his red eyes glaring us down. It's going
Yeah.
to be great.
The beauty of a high plains climate that we have, freezing rain does not occur. Now, yes, we can get freezing drizzle, but let's ignore that for now. No freezing rain. We're not going to have a repeat of San Antonio, whenever that was in the early mid
2007.
Yeah, 2007. Yeah, so it should be pretty good. I mean, it could be very cold, but travel wise, that's cold is not an issue.
So that Western Colorado ice storm was fairly rare in 2017 then, Paul. Is that true? Or because I'd heard it called a rare event, and I wouldn't have thought that. Why is it? What makes an ice storm a rare situation?
Yeah, that was very rare in Western Colorado. Climatologically, they can probably get it a little bit more than the east slope if you throw out freezing drizzle, which is a totally different precipitation mechanism. But freezing rain east of the Continental Divide in the Denver metro area is very hard to do because it's such a dry climate. As soon as precipitation starts falling into it, evaporation occurs, wet bulb, you get below freezing, and it all turns over to snow. To get the overrunning warm nose above the Denver area at whatever that altitude is, maybe 3,000 to 4,000 feet up, it's nearly impossible to develop that warm layer that close to the Rockies.
That is interesting to know. Did you know that, Dr. Kim Coco McLean?
I did not.
I am learning so much tonight. Bruno, we wanted to talk about your work with Spanish language coordination, and I know we referred to it a little earlier with Troy's great work he does. So talk about that, how that's going for you.
Sure. So there are actually like a couple national level teams within the agency. One is what we call the MAS team, Multimedia Assistance in Spanish. So that one's geared really towards kind of short-term assistance. If an office needs help translating maybe a DSS packet for partners or just a weather graphic of some type, they can reach out to the group. And then within a few hours, we'll translate it for them, or even interviews. A lot of the time, especially Southern region offices, those kind of Gulf of Mexico offices, with tropical systems, they get inundated with interview requests from Spanish language stations, both domestic and international. So a lot of the times they just don't have the capacity or anyone that does speak Spanish at the office. So then we come in and fill in for them. And that second team is basically the national Spanish outreach team. So we're geared more towards kind of longer term, whether it's preparedness, seasonal safety campaign materials, official NOAA articles that need translating, that kind of stuff. But there's been some really good progress over the past few years. One of the big projects that we've undertaken recently was the translation of basically Spanish WIA messages, right? And that was implemented, I think, maybe 2 years ago. And that's a big project. So obviously that allows us to reach a huge swath of kind of vulnerable populations that don't speak Spanish, don't speak English as a first language. So now, as long as they have settings on their phone in Spanish, they have the ability to receive WIA messages on their phone in Spanish. So that's really huge.
So, Paul, we haven't talked much about landspouts and tornadoes, and you deal with those too. Explain the Palmer Divide to us and its impact on your forecasting.
Yeah, so if so Denver is kind of at the base of the foothills, but not many people know that straight south of Denver, probably between 30 and 60 miles, is another terrain feature called the Palmer Divide, and it goes up to about 7,300 feet. It's the peak of it, and then on the south side of it is Colorado Springs, and then when you travel north, you descend into Denver, and you descend about 2,000, a little more than 2,000 feet in that range. So it's a gradual descent into Denver. The problem is this feature juts out significantly into the eastern plains of Colorado. And so anytime you get a strong southeast wind across the plains of Colorado, imagine it's hitting the Palmer Divide from the southeast that's jutting onto the plains, and then like a boulder in a stream that flows around the rock, down river of that rock is a little eddy or a gyre that forms. That gyre is called the Denver cyclone, and it tends to form directly on top of Denver International Airport. So I can't count how many times we've seen planes circling because the airport is shut down in clear sky, completely clear sky. And it's because the Denver cyclone is right on top of the airport property. Winds are every direction at like 25 knots. No one's getting in or out until that cyclone moves off the property.
James, you got to take credit for that now. That can't stay in the chat.
So many things should, though. Yeah, I swear Denver International is the single biggest buyer of tornado shelter signs, because every restroom, every terminal, tornado shelter, and a little cartoon tornado on it.
You need a stage name for your weather comedy routine, James A., so we can refer to that as your alter ego during the show. So
Bill,
Kim
don't encourage him. Don't encourage him.
I'm encouraging him.
Terrible, bad idea.
Pretty funny. Kim is deep in thought, and she'll come up with something. Anybody got it? Anything else for our Boulder friends here before James Spann asks the really hard questions? I guess not. We've asked everything we can think of. James Spann?
I want to know what Bruno can play on that guitar in the background back there.
You're gonna be
You can play us out of the show.
Nothing. This is one of those things I bought myself when I was like, I need maybe another hobby, and then I probably picked it up twice, maybe 3 times, and here it sits as a decorative piece in my apartment.
I mean, I was hoping for Stairway to Heaven or something. I mean, come on. And then and most people listen to the show, they don't watch, but behind the guitar, we're seeing some skis back there. So Bruno, are you a top skier on the slopes up there?
Not yet, but it's half the reason I moved here. That's for sure. I've hit the slopes a couple times this season already, thanks to that amazing snowpack. So yeah, it should be a good season.
For tonight,
Paul, have you hit all the ski resorts in Colorado? What's your favorite one?
So far, I haven't hit all of them. Breckenridge is great. So is Winter Park. They're probably my favorites. And then Eldora is always nice because you can just go up there before work. If you're working an evening shift, just go up there in the morning and you're back at the office in time, which is pretty awesome.
How about you, Paul? You got a favorite?
Yeah, I mean, I like all of them, but my favorite is Steamboat Springs. It's the coolest town, great snow, champagne powder, they call it, because it's such a dry, fluffy snow there. It's great to ski on. And they typically get the second most snowfall in the state.
And Neil, I know you're big into surfing. Does it translate into a ski board also?
I do some snowboarding. I like to keep my feet both on the same board. I'm not good with 2 different devices going in different directions. But I was born in Colorado Springs, and so both my parents were skiers. So I was raised up by Vail, probably more than anywhere else. But yeah, Steamboat, Breckenridge are 2 favorites as well.
I'm just the opposite, Bill. The snowboarding thing, Neil, that doesn't work for me. That's something about old man snowboard. It's no good. Now the skis are fine. I mean, I look, hey, that works for me. But the snowboarding thing, I've never been able to do right. So maybe you can teach me sometime.
Well, I'll take it one step further, James. I'm gonna break something I need, I think, and that's why I think I'll break something I need. So
yeah. We did a hotel and Telluride, and they have some fine skiing down there, and I did it once, and that was enough for me. I spent the entire day yelling in terror.
Yeah,
and,
fun fact. I also am terrified of skiing. The one time I've gone, it was a quote unquote hill in southern Michigan. And if you know the terrain of southern Michigan, you know I'm using the air quotes really liberally. And yeah, I decided it wasn't for me. So, bless all you people for whom just throwing yourself down a frictionless surface,
Yes.
That is a good time. I do not share your feelings.
Oh, you
Somebody
know,
took me over to this thing called the Bunny Slope, and I thought it looked like a black diamond or something. I was like, oh my gosh.
And
You
No,
said there
they
were
do not have-
3-year-olds going down on skis. That's what,
Yeah.
Exactly.
sitting there going,
Corey.
what's this old guy doing over here? You know?
They don't have Saint Bernards with brandy, so I'm very disappointed.
Yeah, we were coming off the ski lift, and the instructor says that yeah, we had somebody from Georgia died right here last week.
Oh,
I'm like, oh my gosh. So
Hey,
Sorry
Neil,
about that.
Neil, do you ever go to like West Virginia, like Snowbird and those places over there?
no, not really. I mean, to be honest, the most fun I've had over in like Canaan and is in the summer on using the ski lifts with like a downhill mountain bike. That's actually a lot more fun than the winter. But I'll tell you a funny story. We got to get this guy Billy Sweet on the show. He does a lot of the sea level rise stuff for NOAA. But we were in grad school back in NC State when that January 2000 blizzard hit and dumped like 2 feet of snow in Raleigh. Of course, there's no hills anywhere, but his roommate had a 4-wheel drive Jeep. So we tied a ski rope behind that, and I had a couple surfboards, and we just went wailing through the streets with that, and it was all fun until I hit a fire hydrant.
is that another one of those
Ouch.
near-death experiences? Neil?
Ouch.
No, it just ripped all the fiberglass off the bottom of my board, but that was about it.
You're lucky.
I'm glad, because I'm sure the emergency rooms were closed.
Wow. All right. Well, let's pause here. We could keep on going for a long time. We have to hit Tony Rice and his report. We have Jen did send in a This Week in Tornado History, and we're going to come back with picks of the week and much more as WeatherBrains rolls along.
Looking beyond the atmosphere, here's Tony Rice with your astronomy outlook.
The next couple of weeks are a great time to spot Mars. It's at its biggest and brightest in about 2 years. Look to the east after dark for a slightly reddish or orangey point of light. That's Mars. Just to the left is the star Elnath, also known as Beta Tau, or the second brightest star in the constellation Taurus. To the right, you'll find Aldebaran, also known as Alpha Tau, or the brightest star in Taurus. You can also use the constellation Orion to point the way. Look for the 3 stars in Orion's belt. To the left, you'll find the slightly orangish star Betelgeuse in Orion's shoulder, and up a little further and a bit more to the left, you'll find Mars. Mars will be at its closest point to Earth near the end of this week, but it will continue to get even brighter until opposition next week. Opposition occurs when a planet is opposite the sun in our sky. This is when it's at its biggest and brightest. The moon will also be passing through the scene next week. On Thursday, December 8th, the full moon and Mars will be separated by a fraction of a degree. This presents an interesting observing challenge. Mars is bright, but the full moon is even brighter. Really, really bright. It's about a -12 on the brightness magnitude scale. Mars is only about a -2. You see, that scale is logarithmic, first proposed by Norman Pogson of Oxford University back in 1856. Next week, the full moon will be about 10,000 times brighter than Mars. So try spotting Mars this week, and then try again the end of next. Try covering up the full moon with your thumb. Does that allow you to see Mars? It'll take a really, really clear night to pull this off, because humidity in the atmosphere causes the sky to glow with that bright moon. And if there's any ice crystals in the upper atmosphere, Mars will be lost in the halo around the moon. That's your astronomy outlook. Follow me at RTP Hokie for more spacey stuff like this.
This week in tornado history, 13 tornadoes were recorded during the early morning hours of December 3rd, 1978. The strongest was an F4 tornado that developed at 1:50 in the morning Central Time in the Central Park area of Bossier City, Louisiana. In a summary from the National Weather Service Shreveport, the Bossier City tornado was spawned from a supercell thunderstorm which developed in deep East Texas ahead of a squall line. And for Thomas Grisoulis in significant tornadoes, this twister developed near the point where an F2 tornado on April 17, 1978 ended. The tornado moved to the northeast, crossing I-20 and affected businesses and homes along Benson Road and Airline Drive. It then moved into sparsely populated areas east of Airline Drive and north of US 80 and into the Meadowview area. The tornado destroyed parts of Meadowview Elementary School. Ted Fujita with colleagues Robert Abbey and James McDonald surveyed the damage. Working with official in charge Ernest Etheridge of the National Weather Service, an extensive aerial and ground damage survey was completed. He denoted that the 6 I-beams, which supported the roof of the Meadowview Elementary School, became airborne. The I-beam missiles, each weighing 700 pounds, became lodged in the ground or house after traveling up to 1,100 feet from the original locations. After leaving the Meadowview area, the tornado crossed onto Ladon Drive, and there were 2 fatalities. Tragically, an automobile was tossed into a home, killing sisters Jana Lynn and Lisa Renee Currington, ages 8 and 13. They were sleeping. The National Guard Armory was destroyed, as well as the Northwest Louisiana State School. Home damage occurred in the Stockwell Place and Carriage Oaks area, and the tornado lifted near Red Chute Bayou. Over $100 million in damage resulted from this tornado. Check out more about this event and hundreds more at tornadotalk.com. Calling all weather enthusiasts, join the AMS Weather Band and become part of the American Meteorological Society, whose members have been at the forefront of weather, water, and climate research for over 100 years. You'll get to go behind the scenes with the 10,000 plus scientists, broadcasters, educators, and researchers of the AMS. The AMS Weather Band brings together weather professionals and weather enthusiasts. Band members can grow their knowledge and appreciation of weather and climate by participating in virtual events, online discussions, Q&As, AMAs, webinars, photo contests, and more. AMS Weather Band gives you the opportunity to interact directly with those in the scientific community. Learn more and join the band today at amsweatherband.org.
And Bill Murray, we should thank the AMS Weather Band for being a sponsor.
Absolutely. They have so many cool things, and it's going to be my pick in just a few minutes. Because if you hurry and go over and join tonight or in the morning, you can join their webinar at noon tomorrow, which is going to be hosted by Doug Hildebrand. And they're going to have Phil Klotzbach and Stephanie Zwick. Am I saying that right? I can't remember. I need to pull it up and look. But they're going to be talking about the 2022 hurricane season, which was quite normally abnormal, I guess, or something like that. But that's just one of the many great benefits you get. And we thank all the folks over at the AMS for being part of the show. We thank them for everything they do, and hope everybody will go and join the Weather Band. It's definitely worth it.
So before we do Picks of the Week, let's discuss the 2022 hurricane season. Again, we're doing the show here on the 28th of November, so we can effectively stick a fork in the season for this year. It's done. And I don't have in front of me the stats, but let's go to Dr. Jacobs. Your thoughts on the 2022 Atlantic hurricane season?
I mean, it kind of was about what I thought it would be. I mean, there was a above average energy, but then it's always kind of a struggle. If you're, weak La Nina, maybe less shear. I don't know. It seemed like it got a lot of attention because the Florida seemed to be in the crosshairs all the time. And I think there was a lot of smaller storms that stayed in the ocean that people really weren't paying attention to.
It seems like the ACA was the accumulated energy was high, but the number of systems was maybe lower than forecast. Troy, what do you think?
I'm just going to say, and agree with me or not, Neil, that I mean, location is everything. You go to Florida and you talk to people, especially on the West Coast and even on the East Coast, they'll say it's one of the worst seasons that they recall. I mean, this just had major impacts, and our death toll from Ian is now, I guess, close, Kim, to 150. 140 to 150, somewhere in there. So it's a weird year. It was just a weird year.
Yeah. I mean, you can have a catastrophic Category 5 landfall in a well below average season. I mean, that's happened in the past.
Yep.
Right. If Rick was here, I feel like I need to speak for him when I say it only takes one. We've had a lot of years here in Oklahoma that have been below average tornado years and still catastrophic in their consequences. It only takes one.
Yep.
So good point, Troy.
Yeah.
And again, maybe Bill, we can get Phil or some of these folks on and talk about the seasonal outlooks and how they performed. NOAA and Colorado State. I honestly, again, don't have the stats in front of me, and technically the season's not over yet, but it'll be interesting to look back and get their thoughts for those that do forecast the season in advance. But let's shift gears and let's do picks of the week. So we're going to go around the horn here, and everybody's going to have something that is exciting, that is weather related, something riveting, something that will be remembered for decades. Let's see. Did Rick send one in here? I think he did by email. I'll try and pull his up here.
He did.
He did, but he said people could take it if he didn't show up. So he didn't show up, so I took it.
Oh, well, let's just go to Kim, since she knows what that pick was, and now it belongs to her.
I do know what the pick was. It's a great one. It's actually a pick by a former weather brain, Kevin Selly. He is up to some interesting stuff. The program he has launched is called Weather Insights. And what he's trying to do is take social science knowledge, so just insights about communication in general of weather information, and bring it to the broadcast sector, because a lot of that research, it's there. People like me know it, and it sort of sits on a shelf. It at least doesn't reach the people that are practicing this every single day who need that knowledge. But they also don't have the time to read the full paper. They need these quick little sound bites to make it into their info stream. So responding to that need, he created a program where he could partner with people like me, and he has partnered with my team to get a list of, here's some stuff that if we could just tell broadcasters what we know, here's what we'd want them to know. And he's working through that and interviewing experts and making just very quick little information insights that he puts out in this webpage. And it's launched. I think Rick's pick was just the most recent of the Weather Insights, but I encourage you to give it a look. It's a really neat, easily digestible way to get some of the cutting edge social science research knowledge that we have available for you.
And we actually did talk about that very briefly before you got on with James A., who was a regular on that show. But I'm subscribed and cannot wait. But that's a great pick. So my pick, I saw this headline. It says Delta, the NFL, and the U.S. Air Force are turning to this app to prepare for extreme weather, which caught my interest, because which app would that be? And I've never heard of this before. It's something called tomorrow.io. And I don't know if anybody else has heard of this. Maybe everybody knows about it but me. But it boasts all these clients, and it says that the company is going to send its own satellites into space, which will send back data far more frequently than government weather satellites. Which is anybody ever heard of this thing before? Tomorrow.io.
Yeah, I know them pretty well. It's interesting.
What's the scoop?
I guess it's probably that the satellite technologies, I guess, is probably going to be a beefed up version of NASA GPM or something. I don't really know a lot of the details on it, but it sounds pretty cool. A lot of the app stuff they're using is pretty sophisticated AI enabled back end sort of impact assessment, things like that. So I don't know exactly what the different agencies are using it for, but it's pretty interesting.
Okay. I would assume it's a subscription service or something that designed for businesses. But anyway, it's tomorrow.io. We'll put the link to the article up on weatherbrains.com. So Neil, while you're at it, what's your pick of the week? Go.
So my pick of the week is a YouTube tribute to Frank Drake. He was an astrophysicist and astrobiologist who passed away a couple months ago at the age of 92. And he wrote a paper that was very influential to me because I'm a huge UFO alien junkie. And in there, he derived an equation to calculate the probability on life on other planets called the Drake equation. So it's pretty cool, pretty interesting. And the SETI Institute Search for Extraterrestrial Intelligence did a little video clip in memory of him. So that's my pick of the week.
Awesome. And again, all these will be up on weatherbrains.com. Troy Kimmel, what you got for us this week?
I came with nothing tonight, but by the great thing of theft. I will take I will take James A's from Tulsa. The pivotal weather cartographic. They have photographs online, and as James says, they're mesmerizing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yep. And again, just kind of chasing a rabbit here off topic real quick. I guess everybody saw the Raleigh television meteorologist that was killed in that helicopter crash, which was a horrible situation last week. Jason Myers. Did anybody here know Jason by any chance? I did not. But reading some of the pieces and seeing some of the videos coming out of Raleigh, he just looks like he was a wonderful guy, spent a lot of time in the community, worked really hard, establishing a relationship with his audience. And Jason and the pilot were both killed in this horrific crash that occurred right before Thanksgiving. So I was very sad to see that. All right, James A., let's turn the floor over to you for your pick of the week. Go.
I'm staying in geoscience, but talking about the Mauna Loa re-eruption. First time since 1984, but 3 tweets that I included, 2 are friends of the podcast, basically showing remote sensing, 2 by satellite and 1 from Jim Ledoux on dual pole radar, which is remarkably useful, although you probably didn't need dual pole radar to confirm that there was an eruption happening, but it's still really, really cool.
So I have been busy with this impending severe weather here. What's the latest on the situation out there is in terms of the lava flow and everything else?
Hot red bubbly stuff come out of ground. Yeah. That's all I know.
There you go.
Yeah. Lots of sulfur dioxide.
And that might be the show title right there.
We have not seen a gas eruption like that since my 10-year-old boy.
No.
Oh boy. Oh boy.
Run.
We've somehow morphed into 7th grade humor, which is when the show gets really good here. I like it. All right. So before Bruno and Paul hang up on us, let's go to Paul first, since he's been on the show before. So Paul, give us a good pick of the week. Go.
Yeah, I do a government website. It's the WSSI, the Winter Storm Severity Index. I'll post that in chat and you can add that. But it's kind of neat. It has, shout out to Kim, a ton of social science integrated into it. And it really just tries to throw together all the different ways to characterize winter weather and the impacts of winter weather. I mean, it handles just about everything. So it's kind of neat. I'll share that one.
And that's a very useful product for me as a broadcaster that's trying to communicate to the masses. I find it very useful. And I think it's been around for 2 or 3 years now.
2 to 3 years, yeah. But it's come a long way. I mean, we didn't really tout it much until this past year because they made so many good improvements to it that it's a fantastic tool now.
I will agree with that. It is good. And of course, down here at this latitude, we don't get winter storms that often. But again, watching it from a distance for the cities that do, it seems very effective and it's very well done. So that's a great product. And again, we'll put a link.
James, are they adding that to the Barron and the WSI systems? Because I think I saw that on a broadcaster's social media post somewhere during the Buffalo Snow Blitz.
It is on the Barron box, yes.
I don't know if it's
a lot of stuff on this
or not.
A lot of stuff on these boxes.
Yeah, oh yeah, I mean all the data that we always clamored for. Now there's just too much of it.
Yeah, it's like I'm trying to do the 6 o'clock news tonight, which is the big audience, and they give you 3 minutes, but you're trying to cram in. There's so much really good content that you can show here. And I wanted to show updraft helicity. I wanted to show the Barron model, and there was so many things to do. It's just like you run out of time. 3 minutes is just not enough. But it's that's half the challenge to me now. It's trying to determine what you're going to show the masses. And you throw out the stuff anybody can see on an app, and you get to the stuff that really helps you explain and message what people can expect and what they need to do today to get ready. So, but I will say that WSI and Barron and they've done a great job, from an old man that's been doing this for a long time. It's user-friendly, and they have done a very good job of giving us a quick way of graphically showing people what might happen. All right, Bruno, we've stalled long enough for you, so we're going to turn the floor over to you for something really good. What's your pick of the week?
All right. Well, I'm on night shift, so I've had my head buried in the sand the past few days. So I'm going to just do a shameless plug. We've been spinning up a volunteer group for basically Spanish school outreach talks. Weather Service gets quite a lot of requests for these in English. It's always really fun to do for kids. And now we have some presentations and a group of volunteers to do them in Spanish. So if you know any teachers out there that want to do one in Spanish for kids, we have that available. So weather.gov/education.
That's awesome. And I will say, I have done a very poor job of reaching Spanish speaking members of my audience with critical severe weather information over the years. And we have to get better. We're just missing some people groups in terms of who we're reaching. And this information is for every human being, and we have to do better. So thanks for your work in that. But as I look at the clock here, we got to wrap it up. So Bill Murray, let's go to you for your pick and what's coming up on future WeatherBrains shows.
Yeah, I'll encourage everyone to run again to the AMS Weather Band and sign up before the webinar tomorrow. That's going to be a lot of fun. Next week, we'll be talking to several folks that were involved with the Kentucky tornadoes last December. Trent Okerson, Nora Bergeron from Paducah, WPSD will be with us. The WCM at Paducah, Christine Wilgus will join us, and Dan McKimmey, who's a forecaster at Louisville. We're all actively involved in the storm. So that's going to be a memorable show. The following week, we'll circle back with Joseph Trujillo and talk about some other researchers that are doing things related to that. And, our panelists are just great sources of guests, James. Tonight, I've checked off Billy Sweet, Phil Klotzbach, and Dr. Neil, if you'll help me with the Tomorrow IO people, maybe we can get them on. We're going to have the Climavision folks in early February. Maybe your friend Neil could join that night on February 6th if you remember to run into any of these people over the next couple of weeks. And that's just some of the shows that are coming up, James, on WeatherBrains. We'll have Greg Carbon on the 19th talking about his year-end review. It'll
Meteorological
be
memories.
Yeah, meteorological memories. It'll be fun.
So what's your pick of the week, Bill?
That's it. The AMS Weather Band webinar tomorrow at noon Central Time and 1 p.m. Eastern Time, reviewing the hurricane season.
Okay, awesome. So Bruno and Paul, anything else you guys need to promote, social media accounts or anything? This is your plug-a-rama. Go.
I appreciate it, but I got nothing. It was a pleasure to be on your show. I love joining you all.
Bruno,
we love having
got anything
you too,
for
Paul.
us?
Nah, I got nothing either. Just echo what Paul said. It's been awesome being here. So thanks.
Maybe the next time Bruno comes on the show, we can play Stairway to Heaven on that guitar. I
think he needs to play Hunk of Burning Love for tonight's show.
Yeah. And by the way, for those people watching, I'm really curious. I think Bill is moonlighting. He now is a security guard. On this monitor behind him, he's got this array of security cameras back there, like a night guard at the hotel or something.
They're trains. That's the great website, Virtual Railfan. It has hundreds of webcams around the country where you can watch trains, and so it keeps me company all through the day.
So how do you decide which one to choose?
Well,
I warned y'all.
This show is going right down to 2. Wow.
That's an amazing ability there, James.
It is.
Wow. Well, we got to go before this totally derails. For those that are, derails. See, Adelot is having a bad impact on all of us. We're just becoming, bad punsters here. We're typically on the air every Monday night at 8 o'clock Eastern, 7 o'clock Central Time. For those that watch, they watch on our YouTube channel, youtube.com/weatherbrains. But we know most of you listen. Jen was off this week. We'll come back with a double email segment next week. If you want to get in touch with us, the email address, it is email@weatherbrains.com. And all of the show notes will be on the website, weatherbrains.com. So on behalf of the entire WeatherBrains crew, I'm James Spann. Thanks for listening. Have a great week and God bless.
And I'd like the email that we got at 7:30 tonight. Did y'all see it from Joey Amberson? I'm sure we'll read it next week. But the 1,000th episode looks like it will be on March 17th, 2025, which is St. Patty's Day. And it's just screaming for a live event somewhere, James Spann.
Oh, another live show. We haven't done one of those in a while. Something. Yeah, those are always interesting to say the least. But yeah, no, for a show 1,000, we got to go live somewhere. We have to somewhere find a central point where we can all gather together.
No,
Well, thanks
bar.
everybody. This
Yeah.
a bar.
A bar, that would be the best.
What we finally ought to go to Hooters for 50 cent beer. That's it.